I am very, very pleased to have Diane Cookham-Johnson from Oskaloosa for the presentation tonight. I've met Diane a few years ago. She's a lawyer in Oskaloosa, and she's been doing a tremendous amount of traveling for birds. And I'd seen a post from her trip down to Port Aransas in February. So I contacted her, and so she's going to give the program on the endangered whooping crane and many more birds in that area. I give you Diane Cookham-Johnson.
Thank you, Karen. It's great to be in Johnson County this evening. And we've got some people here in person. Good evening. And thank you. It's always much easier for me to talk to real people than it is on Zoom, but we will make this work. If you have questions this evening, they asked me ahead of time, feel free to interrupt, unmute yourself and just jump in if you have questions. You can also send those in the chat. I think Sandy's going to be watching for that. As Karen said, I'm from Oskaloosa, Mahaska County. And I've been a birder not very long compared to probably a lot of you. I've been birding for about 5 years. My husband is here with me tonight. And about 5 years ago, our youngest child was leaving for college, and my husband travels a lot for work. And so I decided I needed to find a hobby. Someone suggested I take my camera to the Red Rock Dam in the winter to go take pictures of bald eagles. I thought that sounded like the dumbest idea I'd ever heard, but I couldn't come up with anything else that I should do. So I decided, well, I'll do that today, and then I'll move on to something more interesting. And within a couple hours, I was hooked. Then in the spring, a little yellow warbler stopped outside my car window in a parking lot one day. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? I've never seen anything like that before. And so birding became my new passion. You will find me a lot of mornings at Musconkie Marsh in Mahaska County. It's right along Highway 92. It's only about a 30-acre marsh. All of it is visible from the highway. And that is where I spend a lot of mornings. Because of the drought, it's been dry this summer, completely dry. And so I challenged myself and said, you got to figure out something with this new habitat. Go out and see what you can find migrating through. And I'm very excited because I've found 12 species of sparrows out there in the last couple of weeks. So I hope a few more come through before we're all done with the migration season. But today I want to talk to you about the endangered whooping crane and how easy it is for us to get to see the whooping cranes, whether it's in Texas, or I'll also talk a little bit about Wisconsin. Since particularly for you in Johnson County, that's a really easy trip over to Wisconsin. My contact information is here. I think I'll have it at the end. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or if you're ever planning that trip and you're looking for any contact information, let me know. Feel free to reach out anytime. This is a picture of a whooping crane family that I saw when I was down in Aransas. The two parents, obviously, and then the one with the still with the brown on it is a juvenile, first-year juvenile that traveled with its parents from northern Canada. We're going to talk today a little bit about the history of whooping cranes and why they're endangered now, and what's happening to try and protect the whooping cranes. We're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about Baraboo, Wisconsin, and what's happening at the International Crane Foundation. I'm going to talk about the Gulf Coast in Texas and the wintering grounds that the whooping cranes are at near Rockport, Texas, and Port Aransas. These are some, and then we're going to talk about the marshes and the habitat that whooping cranes are looking for. This is right outside of Rockport with one parent. There was another parent, but they were too far away. The two parents and first-year crane living in the marsh. Oh, there we go. And I also am going to talk a little bit about a surprise visit that whooping cranes occasionally make in Iowa. We're not too far from Wisconsin. We're also not too far from their migratory route when they're going from Texas to Canada. So sometimes we get a surprise visit with whooping cranes here in Iowa. And then I also, depending on time, will talk to you a little bit about some of the other birds that you can see in Aransas. One of the advantages, I think, of going down to that area is there are a lot of big birds. So if you have somebody that you're taking with you that isn't necessarily a great birder or very excited about it, there are lots of big birds, so it's easy for them to see. Warblers are not always a great starting point for someone that isn't interested in birding, but a whooping crane is good. Sandhill cranes are good because you can see, anybody can see those, and they have some successful birding. And also, the part that I really liked about the Port Aransas area is the boardwalk systems that they have set up for bird viewing. The birds don't fly away. It's so different from seeing them when they're here migrating through Iowa. You know, if you pull up to a marsh and there are ducks, they all fly away as soon as you arrive. One of the things that I really enjoyed here is that the birds don't leave when you're walking down the boardwalk. And so that was another thing that I think makes it appealing, particularly if you have somebody with you that isn't a great birder and wants to have a lot of quick success. Whooping cranes, where do they live? This is a map of two main routes that whooping cranes tend to migrate on. The route to the west, the nesting grounds for the whooping cranes are in Canada, and actually an area that Canada has now protected, and so we can't just on our own go to their nesting areas. Canada's protected that area so that humans can't just get in there. You need to have special permission, which is a good thing because there aren't a whole lot of whooping cranes right now. So we need all of those little hatchlings to survive. That group that is nesting in Canada in the Northwest Territory, they fly down to Aransas, the Gulf Coast of Texas, for the winters. And you can see the line, migratory line, they're coming right through the Midwest in the United States. You will occasionally hear about one landing and resting for a few days in Nebraska, much like the sandhill cranes do. When they're going back north in the spring, they almost always stop in Nebraska. And we were having, before we got going, we were having a conversation that those sightings are sometimes protected by the wildlife folks because they don't always want us to know where the sandhill or where the whooping cranes are at. There's a second route that you'll see, that line that's to the east. That is from Wisconsin down through Louisiana and into Florida. There are cranes that are migrating from Wisconsin down to Louisiana or Florida. There are also flocks of cranes that are staying permanently in Louisiana. They're not migrating, and a very small flock that's staying permanently in Florida and not migrating. There was actually one whooping crane that stayed in Texas all summer, did not migrate north. This is the first time that's happened in quite some time, so they're not sure why. It appears to be healthy, so we'll see what happens if it ends up staying in Texas and doesn't migrate next spring again. In the 1800s and early 1900s, we started to see a reduction in the whooping crane population. At its height, it's estimated that we had 20,000 whooping cranes in the world. That isn't that many of one type of bird when you think about all of the birds that are out there, but a lot more than we have today. In 1941, they think we hit our low, and that was 15 birds remained. Today, we're just over 800 birds is the estimate for the whooping crane population. The population was harmed primarily two reasons. One was a loss of habitat, which is a same song, different bird. We talk about that all the time for all kinds of birds. Whooping cranes are looking for wetlands, and you know, the development of communities, took away wetlands, and also the expansion of agriculture, of course, in the United States, and particularly in the Midwest, where they used to be, took away a lot of their wetlands. The other problem that whooping cranes had is that their feathers became something that people wanted for clothing. And people also enjoyed hunting whooping cranes for sport. And so that also hurt the whooping crane population. This is the count as of today. Today, it's believed there are 836 whooping cranes. Still isn't very many, but a lot more than the 15 that we had. There are 134 in captivity. Most of those are in Wisconsin at the International Crane Foundation that we'll talk about. There are 543 that migrate between Texas and Northwest Canada at Wood Buffalo is the national park that where Canada protects the nesting grounds. There's 76 on that eastern migratory route, so they're moving between Wisconsin and Louisiana or Florida. There are 77 living in Louisiana that are non-migratory. That number may increase by 2 because they think that there are 2 whooping cranes out there that nobody knows about. When they're doing counts, aerial counts in Louisiana right now, they can't confirm for sure because they never see all of them at the same time, but they think they might have 79. So hopefully this winter, they're hoping they'll figure that out. And then there's a very small flock of 6 in Florida that don't migrate. So 1 or 2 new hatchlings or deaths make a huge difference in the whooping crane population. This is a picture from 1971 of our whooping crane hero, George Archibald. George was a college student talking to one of his roommates, saying, we need to do something in conservation. What should we do? And he became enamored with the whooping crane and its story. And so looked around trying to figure out how can I do something to save the whooping cranes and bring them back, and ended up, his roommate's parents had a farm in Wisconsin that they agreed to sell to him for $1. And so that's how the International Crane Foundation ended up in Wisconsin. It wasn't because that was the perfect spot to raise whooping cranes, or because that was even where you might find them nesting, but it was where you could get land for $1. And so that's where the foundation was set up. And as you look at that eastern migratory route, that's what has caused the number of cranes that are nesting in the Wisconsin area. This is the 50th anniversary of the beginning of George Archibald's efforts. He's still working with the International Crane Foundation. He is retired, but now a full-time volunteer, he would tell you. But he has dedicated the last 50 years of his life to try and save and bring back the whooping cranes. This is one of the whooping cranes that's in captivity. There are different reasons that they keep the whooping cranes in captivity in Wisconsin. Some is because they are injured or have health reasons that they can't live on their own, much like we would see here. For any birds that have been rehabbed. They also have some, there's been a lot of fits and starts in learning about how you raise new whooping cranes. And initially, some of the things that they did when the hatchlings in captivity hatched, they were around humans, and they imprinted almost instantly on their human caretakers, and they would not hunt for food on their own, and they wouldn't migrate. They couldn't figure out how to teach them to do that. They could not get them to associate with the other whooping cranes. So some of those birds still live in captivity too. Here's a picture of George. Now they don't allow any of the hatchlings to ever see a human looking like a human. This is the type of costume that the veterinarians and the techs wear at all times when they're around the whooping cranes. so that they won't get used to seeing humans. Let's see here, just a second here. I'm trying to find my next page in my papers that has nothing to do with any of you. Okay, there we go. And here's another close-up picture. If you ever have the opportunity to go to the International Crane Foundation, it's sort of like a zoo as far as being able to go in and look at cranes. There are 15 different types of cranes worldwide, and they have all 15 species there so that you can see all of the cranes. They also work, and we'll talk about it a little bit more here in a minute, but they work to save all 15 types of cranes worldwide. 10 of the 15 cranes that you find throughout the world are considered at risk of endangerment right now. And the whooping crane is the hero there, of course. And the setting that they have for the whooping cranes, there's no cage. And there's a marsh and a theater seating type area that you can go sit in and stay as long as you want and watch the whooping cranes out in the marsh, and watch them do whatever they do during the day. This is a picture of that area that the cranes are. There are no fences. There's no fences between you and the cranes, and there are no fences around the cranes. So they just have the area. They're not able to fly away. So they have the area to roam however they would like, and they can walk over that hill if they don't like that there are people sitting in the theater watching them. A trip, if you think about going to the Gulf Coast to see the whooping cranes, the best time to go is between September 1st and the end of March. They will sometimes stay into April, but that isn't a guarantee. But September 1st to late March is a guarantee. You'll get to see whooping cranes when you're down along the Gulf Coast. Rockport is the small town that is the destination that you're looking for, and is the marsh area that you'll always find whooping cranes. It's an easy flight into Dallas or Houston. It's also not a bad drive. When I went down there, I drove. There were other places that I wanted to go, and driving was easier, and it's about an 18-hour drive. So 2 days, it isn't too bad of a trip. Rockport itself is a really small community. Lots of snow, lots of human snowbirds are down there in the winter. You'll find lots and lots and lots of camping for trailers and campers. And it's very easy to navigate. It was easy to get around. It's not as big as Iowa City. There isn't nearly as much traffic as Iowa City there. The pricing I found very reasonable. The hotels were very inexpensive. It's an area that economically was hit by hurricanes and has never completely recovered. And because of that, it's a pretty inexpensive area to travel to. So when you go down there and you want to find the whooping cranes, you're looking for the Aransas Bay. And there's a national wildlife refuge that's along the coast that you can drive through. There's lots of public area, public land that you can just walk out and look for them. There are also farms in the area, and they tend to also congregate at the farms because there's food there. And so you can also just drive around and you see them just along the road. It is just an amazing thing when you're seeing them, because you think this is an endangered bird. There are only a little over 800 of them in the world. And here I am looking at 10 of them at a time or 12 of them at a time. And they're standing in this field eating corn. It's kind of the craziest thing that there are so few of them, but they're so easy to see certain times of the year. They prefer to be out in marshes. Just like we have problems here, the marsh levels have been low lately, so they have to look for other food sources. But they prefer during the day to be out in the marshes if they can. And if there's enough food sources for them out there. This is a picture, there's one adult in that picture, I think, that was eating out in the marsh. There's a picture, a little larger view of the marsh areas. Whooping cranes stay together as a family unit, and they also feed in the same area. So when they arrive in Texas, they claim a territory. If they've been there before, they go back to the territory they had before, and the adults will actually fight off other adults that try to take their area. They also fight off the sandhill cranes. Sandhill cranes leave right away. They don't put up much of a fight. But the whooping cranes are very territorial for their family and protect that area year after year, returning to the same place. One of the easy ways, if you make that trip, and I would recommend, is to go out on a charter. And the information I have for the charter here is a charter that is well recognized by the International Crane Foundation. They do a lot of work to help with the habitat year round, so it's ready for the whooping cranes when they come back. They also have ethical practices when they're out in their charters as far as seeing the whooping cranes. They say certain distances from them, they won't pull right up next to the birds so that you can get a better picture. So it's Aransas Bay Birding Charters is the charter company. They also, it was fun going out. It's a husband and wife, and they've lived in this area their whole lives. And they feel like they personally know the whooping cranes, and they will talk to you about the families. And oh, this family group, and then this child, they call them, this child left and joined up with a child from this family over here, and now they feed over on this area. They really feel like they know the whooping cranes personally, and they know the stories for all of them.
They have, and repeat this question for that.
Oh.
Do they have readable tags with binoculars?
The question was, do the whooping cranes have readable tags with binoculars? And yes, they do. In fact, the advantage of tagging a whooping crane is they're big, so they can have big tags. They have tags around their legs, and they're 4 inches. So sometimes you don't even need binoculars to be able to read them, and then they're also color coded. This is a picture of the charter that you go out on. I never saw with this many people. This is the ad from their website. I never saw one that had that many people on it. Usually there were just 4 people on them at a time. But they can get right up next to the land in the marsh, but they don't go any further to bother the birds. The other thing is that they are pretty stable vessels, so they can park and let you sit and watch the cranes, and it's a pretty comfortable ride. Where the windows are, you can get inside, so if it's colder that day while you're going from place to place, you also can sit inside. But speaking of that, here I am from Iowa thinking, oh, I'm going to the Gulf Coast. I'm going the first week of February. This is going to be great. I'm going to get away from winter. Well, it was warmer in Iowa the week I was in Texas. So this was just a reminder. I mean, bring your warm clothes because you just never know what it's going to be like. 37 was a typical high the week I was there. Yes, it was cold. And I was really glad I had left my winter clothes in the car and my snow pants, because they fit pretty good when we were out there in that kind of weather. The other problem they have in Rockport is just the fog in the mornings. So flexibility and a little bit of patience, which is always good for bird watching, is important, because a lot of times they don't leave as early as they're planning in the morning, or you may even have to wait until the next day because of the fog. Some days the charters just can't get out. But what I found and I appreciated is on the charter's end, they were also very flexible with us and they made something work for you so that you could get out while you were down there. There's a picture of the fog. There's a bridge that you have to cross to get to the docks where you go out. And believe it or not, there's actually a very busy town on the other side of that bridge. You just couldn't see it when we were crossing in the morning. Here's a picture of some cranes, the two parents for this family, and they're acclimating to the habitat. As with all birds, as I was thinking, we stopped to eat, my husband and I stopped to eat today before we came out here, and the restaurant had a tree outside the window and there must have been 100 house sparrows sitting in that tree. And I thought, you know, house sparrows have figured out how to acclimate themselves to concrete. They love it. There's puddles and they figured out something to eat. So whooping cranes are just like other birds. They have figured out how to find food wherever they are at. And in Texas, I hope no one is from Texas that's on this tonight. Texans love their white-tailed deer and they are the smallest little deer I've ever seen. But they feed them like nobody's business. And they have really sophisticated corn feeders. And the whooping cranes have figured out when they hear that corn feeder turn on and start to spin because it's spraying the corn for the deer, the whooping cranes come in to eat that corn also. Not the best diet for them, but it is food. So they are here eating in a farmer's pasture where he is feeding the deer. Here's the juvenile or the first year that is with those parents. And there are grackles everywhere. There's their big buck. You can see the legs of the corn feeder in the back of that picture. And it's pretty loud. You could hear it for blocks away when the corn feeders come on. And as soon as that starts up, the whooping cranes come in to eat. And each whooping crane family picks one farm. So if this is my corn feeder, no other whooping crane family is gonna eat at that corn feeder. And they'll chase them off so that they need to go to another farm. Oh, there they are eating.
The deer are okay, but no other whooping crane.
Yeah, the deer are okay. The grackles, they don't pay any attention to, but whooping cranes, and they will, surprisingly, they do share some space with sandhill cranes in this area, but no whooping cranes.
They have a very tough time taking on the deer.
Yes, they would have, there was a comment made here that they would have a tough time taking on a deer, and yes, they would have a tough time taking on a deer. And there's enough food for everyone, so they don't need to fight about that. Here for size comparison, there were two sandhill cranes that were also at this farm. And yeah, I always think of sandhill cranes as pretty big birds until you see them next to the whooping cranes. Whooping cranes are about 5 feet tall. They're the largest bird that we have in North America. They are not the largest cranes, but they're the largest cranes that we have, cranes or birds that we have in North America. They weigh 14 to 16 pounds and their wingspan is about 8 feet. One of the responsibilities that the adult whooping cranes have is for their child, taking care of that first year whooping crane. This whooping crane stopped and just froze and wasn't moving and appeared to be listening for something. And I couldn't hear anything. I wasn't sure what it was. I was in a blind during this. They didn't know I was there. But I couldn't hear anything. I wasn't sure what was going on. But this whooping crane was very nervous all of a sudden and acted like it was listening to something. The other adult was still eating and going about its business, and the first year whooping crane that was with them, their child, didn't care at all, was going about and was eating and not paying any attention. But this one just kept listening and like something was going to happen. And then all of a sudden it leaned forward, which is the sign of a crane about to take off, and off it went, flying away. And in this second picture, you can see whooping cranes actually have black feathers, but you only see those on the ends of the wings when they're in flight. When they're standing still, you don't, or walking around on the ground, you don't see that black on their wings. So this whooping crane took off, and the other two in the family stayed put. And I wasn't sure if I would see it again or what it was doing. The adult that was left on the ground started calling. It became very aware of where the young whooping crane was and made sure that they were close to each other. And it just kept calling. And I think the one that flew off would call back. There was a whooping crane calling back. I think it was that one. And I don't know what they were saying to each other until a second family flew over. And I think that they heard that second family coming a lot sooner than I did, and wanted to make sure that they weren't going to land at that farm to eat. And then sometimes we don't have to go all the way to Texas to see whooping cranes. Sometimes we just get to see them in our backyard. The Green Island Wildlife Management Area is not too far from Johnson County. I don't know if people from here ever go birding there. But this spring there was a report of a whooping crane that had landed there. And really, when you think about it, it's not very far from Wisconsin and Baraboo, Wisconsin. So it probably just stopped to rest on its way to Wisconsin, but not sure because it did not have bands, so we couldn't identify it. But I drove over to Green Island because I thought, well, I can check off, sometimes us birders have to get crazy about our lists, I'm finding out. I wanted to be able to check off that I'd seen a whooping crane in Iowa. And I also wanted to see one and see, what's this single whooping crane doing? It's not traveling with the flock. And it stayed, I think it was about a week that it stayed there. And it was traveling with sandhill cranes. Let's see if we can, so these are the sandhill cranes that were with the whooping crane. And the sandhill crane had a snake or some type of reptile that it was very excited about eating. And the sandhill cranes must have thought it looked maybe okay too. But when you get out of the areas in Texas where they stay together for the winter, sandhill cranes don't put up much of a fight with the whooping crane and try to really take it on. They'll poke around, see if the whooping crane's willing to let them have a little bit. But if the whooping crane doesn't give them any room, they just usually go another direction. So that was fun to get to see that in Iowa. And the way I learned about that whooping crane was through eBird and also the Iowa Ornithologists Union email list. Grand Island, Nebraska is another place where on occasion you can see whooping cranes during the sandhill migration. Whooping cranes tend to come through towards the end of the sandhill migration. Sandhill migration is usually, they say, from Valentine's Day to Tax Day. So from about February 15th to April 15th. Whooping cranes you would be more likely to see towards that April date. That a whooping crane is being seen in Nebraska. So that's going to be pure luck if you get to see one of those. It won't show up on eBird, and they're very hush hush there if there's one in the area. The Gulf Coast, as I said, the other advantage of the Gulf Coast is all of the other bird life that's there. And bird life that's used to having people around. As Karen pointed out to me one time, they also aren't nesting at that time. So they don't have anything that they're trying to protect. So that makes birds a little bit more relaxed. So we've got just a few more minutes. I'll show you some examples of how close you can get to the birds. I stopped at the Hazel Baysmore Park, which is in Corpus Christi. I had looked to see what kind of birds could I see down there that I can't find in Iowa. And this park, very small urban park, had some birds. A green jay was there. And people had told me that I contacted through social media ahead of time, we promise you'll see a green jay if you pull in the parking lot. And I pulled in the parking lot and there was a green jay. I couldn't believe it. And then the golden fronted woodpecker was another bird that was in that park. And then cardinals. Then I went on down to Rockport, and that's where the whooping cranes are. And my first boardwalk was a wetland sanctuary that's right in town. There's industry on both sides of this boardwalk. It's just amazing. And the birds just sit. Well, that one's flying, but it was flying right by the boardwalk. They sit on the boardwalk while you're there. They don't, I mean, people were walking back and forth on the boardwalk. They're walking their dog. The birds didn't fly away. They stay in the water right below the boardwalk so that you can get really nice looks at the birds close up. The black vultures there. And then turkey vultures we have turkey vultures everywhere, I think. Northern harrier. And the yellow rump warbler, we were talking about that before we were going. They've been crazy this fall around us. Willet. And then there's a ferry, and I thought, oh, what's this going to be like trying to use a ferry to get over to the island? But I thought, I gave myself a little pep talk. People do this all the time, Diane. They do it with campers. You can certainly do it in your car. And it's part of the state highway system in Texas. There's no charge to ride the ferry and to cross. And it felt a lot like going to Disneyland. There were pylons and lines to get in with your cars, and they had 60 people on each side that were guiding people and helping them get on the ferry. During the winter, it's not much of a wait either. I waited 5 minutes maybe for the next ferry. There are times during spring break, if you happen to be there during spring break, they said the wait can be up to 2 hours to get on the ferry because spring break's kind of crazy down there. It's about a 3-minute ride across on the ferry to the island. Even the birds get lazy and they ride the ferry because they don't want to fly. I don't know. There are dolphins in that area, which was fun to see. And then you get across in the area, the Leona Bell Turnbull Birding Center is part of their water treatment plant but the city has put a boardwalk in around the area. And it is truly amazing. Even the most I hate bird person that's with you on a trip, they just melt at this boardwalk because the birds are so close by. There's no zoom on my camera. They're just right there. They're within 10 feet of you and they don't care and they don't leave. There's a picture of the boardwalk. And they have alligators also. Remember, it was 37 degrees out when I was there. So even the alligators were cold and they never came out of the water. So I never got to see a complete alligator. But an American avocet with its black neck stilt friend sleeping. So these were all taken. This one is not dead. He's looking. I looked at that picture and said, oh my gosh, is he dying? He was looking for insects underneath the grass. And you get to see them, you get to see the birds just doing what birds do. I'm standing on the boardwalk and this was just right below us. So the boardwalk was full of people. People were talking, walking their dogs, doing whatever they do. And the birds stick right around. Those great-tailed grackles are everywhere. They're like our house sparrows. But the quantity of birds the ability to have them right there next to you, I just thought was a really fun birding experience. I think that takes us to the end. In closing, I would encourage anybody that has an opportunity, since we live in Iowa, even heading over to Wisconsin. If you do go over to Wisconsin to the Crane Foundation, you can also see whooping cranes in the wild. It's not just the ones that are in captivity. The whooping cranes in the wild, they're a little protective. If you ask at the International Crane Foundation, can you point me in the direction of the whooping cranes? They usually go, I don't think so. But it's kind of like looking for birds around here. Gravel roads are the best, and you don't need to go very far. And what we found as we were driving in the area is you started to realize, oh, this is where they're going to be, because farmers have signs out that say, go slow, whooping cranes and nesting. And that was within a mile of the Crane Foundation. So you can start figuring out where the whooping cranes are just by that. Locals, people at the gas station were much more likely to tell you how to find a whooping crane than the people at the Crane Foundation were. But that's also a great trip to go up and see them. But anytime in Texas, don't go for the weather, but do go for the birding. It's a great place, a great opportunity to see birds. Does anybody have any questions?
They make your life then.
Someone asked, do they mate for life? Yes, they do mate for life. If something happens to one of the pair, they will then mate with a new mate, and then they mate for the life of that pair. The juvenile stays with them for the first year. So let's say they're born, they hatch in Canada, they fly to Texas, they'll fly back to Canada with their parents, but upon arriving in Canada, they leave and find their own mate, and then they start, then they'll migrate with their new mate.
There was a comment, excellent presentation, one of our best. So thank you very much.
Thank you. There was a question, how many are banded? That's a good question. It has to be at least 3/4 of them, because so many of them have come out of Wisconsin. And everything out of Wisconsin is banded, and Louisiana is able to band most of theirs. The goal, of course, would be that we start having hatchlings that aren't banded because they were just born on their own, without any human intervention. But still, I think it has to be well over 3/4 of them are still banded. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. It was fun talking to all of you, and it was fun coming to this park. I'm going to be back here to bird on another day when the sun is out.